Sober Sophistication, the podcast. Sober Sophistication, living in a new way.
Come on, y'all.
Alcohol free.
Hey,
Sober
hey.
meets classy. Live your best life and sip with us. Sophistication is a must. We're winning in a new way. Where sober meets classy. Sober Sophistication.
Hey.
Sober Sophistication.
What's going on, fam?
Peace, family.
So, we have reached Sober Sophistication, the podcast. And I am Karima.
I'm Anthony.
And of course, we are the proud owners of the Magnolia Fruits and Orchards and non-alcoholic winery. And this is our podcast, y'all. So we are on episode number 5. Made it. Yeah. And so, Sober Sophistication, the podcast, is the place in which we discuss love, lifestyle, and everything non-alcoholic wine. And tonight we have an amazing guest, y'all. Of course, we came out of dry January. We're in now Black History Month, right? At least that's what they say. We celebrate Black History 365, right? And so today we have a guest with us where we're going to talk about something very, very, very important, and that is our youth. Oftentimes when we have conversations about alcoholism, we talk about adults, and we should, right? But there's a segment within our community that we completely ignore, and we shouldn't, and that is our youth. So tonight's topic is lit, youth and alcoholism. And we have with us, like I said, an amazing sister who has made it her mission to work with our youth, to be an advocate for our youth when it comes to alcohol addiction. So without further ado, Sober Sophistication podcast fam, let's welcome Jacquelyn Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you sound great. Sound fantastic.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Look, I'm a little tongue-tied tonight. I guess I'm like kind of excited and I want to get into the conversation. So let's just kick it off. What's your first question?
So, before we get started, I apologize to you, Jacqueline. I apologize to our audience. Inside out of our home, all been battling a little sickness. Is like came in our house. It's been, making
Doing
its
this rounds.
So I feel better than I probably sound. My throat is a little scratchy and dry, so drinking a lot of water. Not as thirsty as I may look. I'm just trying to keep myself sounding scratchy. So, Jacqueline, the first thing that what we wanted to have you share with us, and our audience, is what are the signs of
So, signs of addiction for adults is probably very similar to those for the youth, for teenagers. And some of those signs are really, first, let me start off by saying thank you for the opportunity to share this. And it is my mission. It is my passion. And I'll probably go in a little bit as to why that is, because I often want to make sure that I express why, so that it doesn't seem like I'm coming across like I'm a clinician, because I'm not. Okay. It's my passion because I was one of those teens who suffered from alcoholism and had no idea what was going on and tried to hide it and didn't even know what I was doing at that time. And so now that I am sober, and it took years for me to figure out what was going on, it is my passion, it is my mission, and I think it is something near and dear to my heart. So some of those signs, really, when you ask that question, it's going to look like it can be masked by what seems to be typical teenage things, like wanting to isolate and be in their room all the time. Well, we know that all teenagers like to do that. But there's some real difference when you look at it. When a teenager is just wanting to be a teenager, they'll still come out from time to time. Children who tend to be caught up in some sort of addictive behavior, they stay isolated, and there's a lot of sneakiness, a lot of deception that goes along with that. So sometimes the teen will not just withdraw from the family, but also withdraw from friends, and you'll see their friend group change, like drastically, almost overnight. You'll see them change their, the type of activities that they're interested in. Whereas at one time they seemed really happy-go-lucky and open and, talking, and then all of a sudden kind of shut down and isolate. And you'll think that, oh, they're just a normal teenager doing teenage things. But there's other things that might come across. There's cross addiction. And when you talk to different people who are familiar with what it looks like, you'll hear things like sneaking food, sneaking candy, hiding those things. You'll find wrappers under beds or in closets or in some dresser drawers or something like that. And so you may think that they're just hungry, or maybe they just tried a little bit of weed or something like that, and so they got a case of the snacking right immediately afterwards. But there's a lot of cross addiction with the overuse of food and the overuse of drugs and alcohol that kind of go hand in hand sometimes. So those are just a couple of the things. But students at school, the major change in school behavior, attendance, personality changes, becoming a behavior problem at school. And it might be like lashing out at even people that they were once close to. And attendance will look like they'll make up excuses to not be at school so that they can either sleep off a night of being drunk or high or something like that. Or it could be that they just don't want to be at school anymore because they want the opportunity to be alone in order to, use and drink. So those are a couple of things that come to mind.
And if I can just
Sure.
Interject this question, because a lot of the things that you name, like when you're kind of listing some of the things that, especially with the cross addictions, like I could think of just the other day, me finding wrappers of candy in our son's drawer. I mean, I almost felt like you were there looking over our shoulder, like you saw what was happening in our home, right? And so as a parent, how do I make that distinction, right? I appreciate in terms of the withdrawal, that definitely was very helpful. The immediate change of friends. But how do I know that when I'm seeing these other elements that there's an addiction there and not something else that I need to be, that is of no concern?
So when you see those kind of things, also look for other patterns and changes in behavior that'll go hand in hand. And then having an open and honest conversation that's not accusatory, and really having an open door policy and letting your child know that whatever it is, just talk to me, and kind of in a non-threatening way. So I asked my daughter before we got on here if I could share some experiences. So my daughter is not, she doesn't, I don't believe, have an alcohol problem. Actually, knowing what I've gone through, she's probably gonna shy away from it and not want to ever touch it. But she has been open and honest with me about using, attempting and trying out marijuana. And so the fact that she has done that, I didn't punish her, And I kind of had to let go a little bit. And this is some, some techniques that I use based on a 12-step program that I work. But I had to let go of trying to control it, and like, I can't punish her for trying it, because that just means that she's going to shut down more and just not. But instead I was able to talk to her about the dangers of it, and then just keeping an open door policy so that she knows that she can share with me, and she knows what my expectations are, that that in my home in particular, there's no alcohol in my home, there's no drugs or anything at all in my home. And so I just kind of had to have that conversation with her about, you're going to do what you do and I can't stop you, but here are the dangers of it, and here's where I draw the line, so that if it does become a problem, I will lead you to the solution, but I won't allow it in my home. And even to the point that if that means that I would have to drop you off at a shelter so that it doesn't come in my home, that's something that I'm willing to do, because I can't have that chaos in my home, because then my own sobriety would be at risk. But the other behaviors that go along with it is the sneaking and the lying. And some of that is, children are going to do that, especially when they think they're going to get in trouble.
Right.
And so the more that you're able to, allow your child to feel comfortable enough to share what it is, knowing that they're not going to get punished or yelled at or shamed, because there's a lot of shame that goes along with addiction and alcohol and drug use, that I'm trying to remove that shame. Because one, if you're a parent who doesn't, who has these expectations that we don't do that, and then they know that they've already done something that goes against what your expectations are, or what your morals are and your norms are in your house, then they're automatically going to know, I need to lie about it, because they know that it's not acceptable. And so whatever way that a parent can just make that policy open, that you all can talk about it, even though this is what I expect, this is what I like and don't like about it, and here's why. You're not a bad person. It's not about bad behavior. And that's one of the biggest things. Like, when I think back to when I first in my life tried alcohol on my own and used it and started to getting into that area of abusing it, I knew I needed to lie about it, because I knew my parents didn't want me to. Right. And I also knew that there was a lot of shame with it, because I knew it was wrong. And so knowing that it was wrong meant that I had to hide it and I had to sneak it. And that added some other layers onto it, because not only am I doing this thing I shouldn't be doing, I'm lying and I'm trying to hide it. And it's just this whole, it becomes this big mess that I created, and I have no idea how to get out of it. And so some of those sneaky behaviors of, if there's time unaccounted for, when a teenager is out and about and you can't access them for whatever reason, that would be a telltale sign. I think back to my daughter, who, she was in middle school, and we were living in Milwaukee, and there was a time that she wasn't accounted for, and I knew something was up. I wasn't sure what was going on. Right. But I went looking for her, and she was behind the school building with a group of kids, and that's when they were first trying to smoke a joint together. And so it's like, yeah, see, those are those things. It's like time unaccounted for. Like, she was supposed to be at home. I was coming home from work. I expected her to be home, and she wasn't where I expected her to be. And, this story of started to try to get made up. No, we weren't doing anything. We were just playing. And it's like, were you really? Let's talk a little bit, and I just had to dig a little bit into what was really going on behind the school because, nothing good is happening behind the school. And that's
especially not behind the bleachers.
Right.
Now, I have a question, with Anthony and I talk often about parenting, right? And trying to parent in such a way where, we allow our children a certain amount of space and freedom to make decisions, but at the same time, have some sort of governance over what they're doing, because the reality of it is, you know, especially when it comes to weed, whereas yesterday, you know, smoking a little marijuana, they live to tell the story. Nowadays, they're lacing marijuana with fentanyl, and children are dying from first try. And the same when it comes to trying alcohol for the first time. You know, children, they're mixing all kinds of things, making all kind of strange concoctions, and children are dying from the first try. So my question is, as a parent, how can we engage our young people in that conversation without it being too overbearing or overwhelming to our young people, where they won't feel it necessary to shut down because we're just like, you know, but that is really our fear of what is out there that causes us to kind of have the energy that we have about the conversation.
Yep. So I think about one of the first conversations that I had with my daughter about it. And it was really and this was before I even knew that she had ever tried anything. So this was me just, you know, she was becoming a preteen and I wanted to have the conversation with her. And so one of the things I asked her was, what is your relationship with alcohol? And she was like, what? And I was like, if you had to define your relationship with alcohol, what do you think that looks like for you now, but also in the future? Like, when you see yourself as an adult, what does that look like? And so we kind of talked about what that looks like, because she, in her experience with me through most of her childhood, and now she's a young adult and she's adulting, but she didn't see a relationship that I had with alcohol. And so I needed to help her define what that was going to look like for herself. You know, in some families, alcohol is a part of their life. And I know that she has seen it with, you know, other family members. Like, we'll have gatherings and be around family members where they're drinking, and some drinking less than others and that sort of thing. So I really had to just help her define what that relationship with alcohol looks like for her and was going to look like. So that's one of the things that just comes in my mind.
I was going to ask, do you think as parents sharing our personal experiences with alcohol, is that something that's helpful, at least in kind of, I would say, just kind of bringing, you know, this dynamic with children and parents where they kind of look up to us. And I think sometimes, at least my experience has been, when I share with my older daughter, when I would share with her my experiences when I was her age, when she was going through certain things, there opened up a path for relatability, where I don't see you necessarily, I know you're my parent, but now I can kind of see you, at least in the context, as a peer who has gone through certain experiences. Do you think sharing our history with things, whether it's drugs or alcohol, is that helpful in kind of building this kind of trust to have this dialogue with children?
I definitely think it's helpful. When I compare the way that I parent now to the way that my parents parented, and knowing what my journey was, there's a real distinct difference. There was a lot that wasn't talked about in my house, with especially with my mother in particular. We didn't talk about anything. Matter of fact, I knew she had some history, but she didn't talk about it, about anything that would happen with, and that's almost with anything. But when you're talking about alcohol, definitely there were events and, you know, situations where I know that they had to have been going through some things that I had gone through, but they didn't talk about it. So they seemed totally unrelatable, like you said, and almost felt like they were too old, and there's no way that they had any experience that I had and couldn't have engaged with me about any of those things. And so talking with my daughter about it, one of the biggest things that I tell her is, let my life be the example in many cases of what not to do.
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
my past definitely is what not to do. A lot of the trials and tribulations that I went through and some of the painful experiences I went through were because of my use of alcohol at such a young age. And I had no idea what some of the research was about that and how that was going to impact me, because I was a teenager and I was thinking in terms of what I was doing as a teenager. I was not thinking ahead to how what I was doing right now was going to have this potential harm for me later.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
knowing that I had to be on this show, speaking with you all, I was like, what is the research? I can speak about my own life, but let me come with a little bit of research too. So, and it clearly stood out to me. And as an educator, I am an
Yes.
educator and work with teens and youth. And so what I have seen to be the case, if I use the things that I experienced as a teacher and what I saw with students, and now some of those students are grown-ups and adults now. Some of the same students that I had that at that time struggled with alcohol, struggled with it down, later in life. And now I'm really grateful that I was also that kind of mentor for them at the time, and that we're still friends now, because several of them have found recovery now. But some of the research is that many adults who used alcohol by the time they were 15 were 5 times more likely to develop alcohol dependence sometime in their lifetime.
Wow.
And so that speaks volumes that if anyone who tries it before 15 has a greater likelihood of becoming dependent on it and addicted to it later. Teens don't know that. Like if you tell a teen, if you mess with that, you're likely to get cancer later, they'll be like, oh, okay. Or
Right.
at least that idea might be sparked in them to know that.
Right.
Well, I think if we start sharing some of the research and some of the truth about alcoholism and other drug addiction, in a way that they can relate to, it's like, oh, if you try it now, you're more likely to be dependent on it later. They might be like, you know what, I might not want to do that yet. I'm not ready for that yet, that journey and what that looks like.
Yeah. So, and you were speaking about, well, we were talking, I think, about support that we can give to children as parents, and then you talked about in the school system. That leads me to want to kind of shift to organizations that have a focus on combating alcoholism, or that promote a sober lifestyle. From your experience of what you've seen, what do you think the engagement is with these organizations when it comes to Black and brown youth in particular? Is there are our children being ignored in the largest landscape of organizations who are trying to promote sober lifestyle and who are trying to combat alcoholism in youth? From your perspective, what do you think the organizations who are doing these type of works, are they really effectively engaging Black and brown youth?
So I don't know. My opinion on that, I don't know that any organization is intentionally not engaged, but I think there's a definite access issue. And that's just about with anything, with especially access to the degree where our community is more impacted by drugs and alcohol.
Yes.
And so
absolutely.
therefore, because of that, the problem is so big that the impact that any small agency can make might be outside of what they're able to handle with the amount of resources that they have. But there are some interesting things. I know of some things happening in some of the larger school districts around, the greater Atlanta metro area, and community-based schools are definitely a place where resources are being made available to children in the community. Because and what a community-based school is that if you can envision what it looks like to have a school, but also a healthcare agency and mental health and drug and alcohol addiction all right within one building, and there being access to that resource in region, in a specific region in that district, those kind of that kind of action is taking place now in some of the larger areas, so that students and families can get the resource that they need. I know that DeKalb has some community health agencies. I work in Clayton County Public Schools, and we have some of those as well. And I believe there's some in Atlanta as well. And so knowing that there are those agencies, and in order to make it happen, we have to partner with other agencies.
Right.
And partner with some of the healthcare agencies, in particular, Emory Hospital is huge in making that happen. And which means that our students are getting, and our families are getting access to those kind of community-based resources that are needed, and recovery resources. But then there's also there's other 12-step recovery programs all around. The thing is that many of those programs don't tend to promote, because they're based on attraction rather than promotion. So that means that someone has to kind of have the desire to want the recovery in order to access the resource.
Right.
However, even with that, some of those 12-step agencies are doing things like putting flyers in the schools so that people know that it exists.
Right.
And also putting flyers in some other type of like doctors' offices and places where families and communities are coming, so that they know that this resource is out there, in order to reach the communities more.
I guess when it comes to the attraction side of extending support, what if, as a young person, I don't know that I'm addicted to alcohol? It seems to me that would be a major barrier, especially if, just from the work that we do with our company, we hear a lot of, I need alcohol. Not I want, I need alcohol. This is what, when we're engaged in the community, we get a lot, right? How do I party and really have a good time without alcohol, right? So it's almost as if we can't seem to separate the use or indulging or overindulging in alcohol with socializing and having a good time. Like there's this codependency relationship. So as a young person, if I'm looking at adults engaging alcohol in that way, how do I then see that as an addiction? Like how would I even know that that's a problem if everything around me says, oh no, this is what you need? And it's interesting you use the language adulting, because that's one of the things that we talk about, we want to redefine is adulting. If I see as that's a part of me adulting, how do I recognize it now as being an addiction?
That is probably the hardest thing. And anyone who ever struggled with an addiction and alcoholism and then finds recovery, that is that question that we all who seem to have the same thing that we have discussed, like, where is that invisible line?
Right.
It's known as this invisible line because no one knows what the invisible line is. Some people are addicted from the very first time they ever take their first drink. Some people find that they were able to manage it and control it for different, periods of their life, but there really isn't there is no way to know until most people wait until they start having consequences and problems before they recognize that it's even a problem. And that is because of the attitudes and the perceived normalcy of it. And the drinker themselves, that teenager who tries alcohol themselves, there's a couple reasons why it's so hard. Because one, there's still a stigma to, oh, I'm not a drunk like that.
Right.
And it's because this perception of what alcoholism really looks like. And so I think back to, and just sharing a little bit of myself, my father owned a bar. And so there was always alcohol in the house. My father rarely even drank it. He may have drank it, watching football on Sundays or something like that. But I never really, I can recall only a few times seeing my father actually drunk. But I always had access to alcohol. And so having access to it meant that I was in an environment where it was still kind of normal. And so I had no idea that the first time that I started sneaking dad's beer, that I was going to become, dependent on it and addicted to it later on. It just seemed fun. And I was just having fun. And so if I had been able to interview myself back when I was 14, when I first started sneaking dad's alcohol, I never would have thought that I had a problem at that time. It wasn't until years later, and I'm gonna be honest, I landed in my first detox and treatment at the age of 18.
Wow.
So, and I wasn't an everyday drinker, but I had already started having consequences from those binges and those times of partying by the time I was 18, and had no idea what was happening. And so even then at 18, I ended up there, and I still was kind of like, oh, nah, that can't be what's wrong. Because I think about, I'm like, I'm only 18. I haven't even lived yet. There's no way that this is something that's a problem.
Yes.
I can see that.
I had just got a bad bout of, a bad case or a bad bottle of liquor or something, at a party that I was at in high school. So my perception was totally off from what was really happening to me. And that's because nobody had talked to me about it. And so, having other people who have the experience and who have gone through it themselves to be able to talk to young adults about what they're going through, so that it's like, oh, yeah, what you're going through could be something else. It could be more than you just liking alcohol a little bit.
You brought up something that I hadn't considered it till just now, but as a child, the image of alcoholism was like the Ned the Wino character. You know what I mean? Somebody who was on the streets, destitute, they smelled bad, I didn't know what a functioning alcoholic was at the time. I started drinking, I think I had my first alcoholic beverage when I was 15 years old. But to your point, I could never see me being like that, because that was the only image of alcoholism that I saw, And then when I got to college, I think I started to see it really looked bad to me when females would get drunk, because I would see them, throwing up and stuff like that, and I was just like, man, that's not a good look, But that's such an important point in terms of what that looks like. But nowadays, depending upon who you are, if you dress the part, you look nice, you have nice clothes, you have all the external trappings that make people think that you are functioning through life, but you can really have some real issues. That's important for young people in particular to be able to kind of see through it,
And if I could just speak to just the elephant in the room quickly, to your point about what we perceive one who has an addiction to alcohol looks like, we also don't think about that child that comes from that good home, right? Parents work, the doctor, the lawyer, there's some affluency there. They're popular. They're doing all. They have all the right, buzzwords that we look for, right? In someone that couldn't possibly have any problems with alcohol, right? Or they come from that, really spiritual household, right? We don't think that, that child would possibly have any issues with alcohol. If you can kind of speak to that, because I think, I don't put nothing past nobody. Okay. So
She really don't.
I really don't. And I'll ask our older daughter and eldest son in a heartbeat, what are y'all doing? No, what y'all really doing? Right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't assume, because we strive hard to provide them with the best that we can and to put them in all the right environments, that somehow that exempts them from having what ultimately is a challenge with mental health. And that can visit anybody. It's not unique. So if you could speak to that, it would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. So you just described pretty much my upbringing. Came from a 2-parent household. My mother was a director of nursing. I look back at it and we were pretty affluent when I think about it. My father owned a bar. We never wanted for anything. Mm-hmm. And mom, grandmom went to church every Sunday. Auntie, I had to go to church along with them. I mean, that's what my reality was. We got woken up every Sunday to go to church. Mm-hmm. And we had Sunday dinner sitting down together. And there's kind of a funny, I think it's funny now looking back at it. But, we would sit and have dinner every Sunday and mom or dad would have a glass of wine. Now, it's interesting. I look back at that experience now. They would have a glass of wine occasionally at Sunday dinner. Right. This girl right here loved when they did that. As early as 8 years old, I loved when they did that because they would allow my brother and I to be able to sit and have a half a glass of wine with them. Mm-hmm. And it seemed normal, right? And no one knew that there was going to be a problem for me down the road. Mm-hmm. And my brother's experience and my experience are two totally different things. So understanding too that alcoholism, in my opinion, and based on a whole lot of research, it is a disease, and some people may not agree with that, but when alcohol enters my body, something different happens than what happens with other people. Mm-hmm. And I can talk about that a little bit too, but please. As early as 8 years old, when there was the only time that I would volunteer to do the dishes, because my parents would still leave some of their wine in the glass and walk away. Mm-hmm. So I would go and I'd sneak it and drink the rest of it. Wow. And they assumed I was just dumping it out, right? Right. Because they weren't alcoholics. Mm-hmm. They didn't know what my relationship with alcohol was at that time. I didn't even know or understand what it was. I had no idea why I liked it and what I was getting from it. I really, really loved that very first that euphoric feeling that I got when it hit me. Right. And, some people, when they drink too much, most people, when they drink too much, get hangovers and they don't like how they feel the next day. Well, for some of us who suffer from alcoholism, that's not our experience. We drink some alcohol and want more. So there's no line for me from. There wasn't. I mean, I've been sober, over 13 years. And even before then, there were periods of, long-term sobriety throughout my life. Because, again, from the time I was 18, I knew that there was something between me and alcohol that didn't work. Right. Most people don't end up in a treatment facility at the age of 18 because, how they react to alcohol. So even at that young age, there's this thing that we understand. It's called we call it an allergy, right? And most people know that allergies look like if you take something in that you shouldn't have, you might break out in hives or your throat will close up and that sort of thing.
Right.
Well, those of us who suffer from alcoholism, there's this thing that where we drink a little bit and there's like no stopping until something else makes us stop. And I went through that a long time. For me, what that used to look like was drinking until I passed out.
Right.
And drinking into a blackout. And there's some commonalities amongst people who find out or finally get to the point that they realize that they had some alcohol dependence. But the thing about blacking out from drinking, that is something that seems common from people. Those of us who, have found recovery and have recovered from alcoholism and are working, a recovery program that is keeping us away from the thing that could be deadly for us.
It's interesting you used the language, it was that first high. And when you said that, I immediately thought about drug addiction and how oftentimes when those who are experimenting with drugs, they keep looking for that first time high. So they keep trying it and trying it. They start getting into harder and harder forms of narcotics because they're looking for that high. And I remember, because, all of us, we grew up during the crack era in particular. And they talked about how there was something within the molecular structure of that particular drug that affixed itself to us biochemically. My question to you is, as it relates to alcohol, have you read any studies in particular, especially when you talk about how for you, your initial introduction to alcohol was very different from maybe someone else? Is there any research that talks about any biochemical bonding that takes place with alcohol for some people versus for others?
I don't know of any offhand. I'll tell you that the greatest research that and some people may not consider it research, but there's this wonderful book called The Book of Alcoholics Anonymous that explained from an alcoholic's perspective what happens when they drink alcohol. Okay. And it wasn't until I read that book that the light finally went off to me as to, that's what the heck is going on. Mm-hmm. It's finally when I was like, now I know what the problem is, and now I know that I can find a solution to it. Because I thought that I was just behaving badly, that I was crazy, that there was something wrong with me. Why can't I stop this thing? And I didn't understand what was going on. But when alcohol gets put into my body, I want more and more and more and more. It never looked like how it did for other people. It never looked the way like I'll just have a sip and then I'll be done. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's youth out there struggling with it. We see it. We see, like you were talking about, we see them dying from it. Mm-hmm. The amount of young people who are ending up in treatment centers is way more than it used to be. And that's because the access to alcohol and other drugs is it's on every street corner. It's all over the place. It's in every song. It's in every TV show. It's like, oh, you're not famous. You're not pretty. You're not this and that unless you have a glass of alcohol in your hand.
That's right.
And so it's interesting because I, of course, when I'm watching something on TV and paying attention to it, like, oh, wow, look how they make it look so nice. And like, there's no struggle and it's legal. Alcohol is legal. And so being that it's legal means that it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with it.
You hit the nail on the head. It's interesting to me how certain products, there was a time that it was illegal for their products to young people, right? But it seems like that barrier that once existed no longer exists. We see it when it comes to alcohol, putting alcohol beverages in little cans now and giving them these pretty wrapping, and they have the vape centers, and they have all the sweet candy and smells and all the other things they're doing. We know doggone well that's not for adults. That's to entice young people. So as we're kind of getting to a point where we're starting to wrap up this conversation, and we thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us. It's been so wonderful. Like, we hadn't even had a chance to kind of read some of the feedback. So if I can just go through this real quick. I'm so sorry, sis. Let me back up. The feedback has been really wonderful. Brother Hazah has Essential Brother. You definitely want to follow this brother on Instagram. He gives or provides a social support group for Black men specifically who are battling alcoholism. So thank you so much, Brother Hazah, for joining us tonight. He said, hey, Magnolia Crescent Orchards, let's go. Excited for this episode. Yes. Look, we knew it was going to be awesome. Whenever we're talking about our young people and how we can put them first and see to their needs, it's always going to be a dope episode, right? Natasha Wilson, she said, hey, everyone. Natasha's actually an educator too on the collegiate level. So we thank you so much for joining this conversation. And we know that there's some things that you learned tonight that you can take it back to your university and get that conversation going. We have Sister Tisha Muhammad. Look, I just found out recently that she's from the Bronx. Hey! Walaikum Salam, family. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Look, I do something special about that, sister. And of course, we have our dear brother Jamil, Student Minister Jamil Muhammad. Thank you for joining us. He said, thanks for weighing in on this very important subject, family. Thank you for joining us, big brother, and thank you for that. And then who else we have? And he said, Sister Jacquelyn's account is very moving and compelling. Thank you, dear brother. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I just wanted to make sure that you got that feedback, that you feel that love, that what you're sharing this evening is making a difference, and people are being, all of us, including us, are being edified by it. And we hope that we'll be able to bring you back again and again and again, because we can never exhaust this conversation. For those of you, yes, Bronx in the house now, Co-op City, Section 2. Let's see. We also have the book that you referred us to. I want to thank you for putting that on the screen. This is very important. Sister Jacquelyn mentioned the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is a book that we definitely want to have in our library, and we want to read. We want to crack it open. We want to have discussions and any other books that you want to share with us, because I'm a firm believer in books and giving us materials that we can refer to that help us even enter in these conversations with our young people, because this kind of conversation sometimes could be a painful one. Like, I look at just my family alone. I think, matter of fact, I know a big part of the reason why I never moved into alcohol addiction or drug addiction is because of the very powerful living testimonies of family members, and how I saw their lives spiral out of control and they all died. So that was, imprinted on my mind and on my spirit. That is not the route that I want to go. And so that's how I learned, don't even go down that road. And so, but what about the families that may not have those examples or may not know how to reconcile those examples, right? What are some resources that you can refer us to that can help us navigate this with our young people?
Definitely. So if you just type in Google anything like 12-step programs for teens, you're going to find a whole lot of resources. There's a lot out there available, and whether you're a young adult or an adult who's struggling with it, there's gosh, and now you asked me, and so my brain totally, there's sustained recovery, there's Women for Sobriety. If you look up sobriety recovery options, there's a lot. Any alcohol and other drug addiction resources. NAMI has a lot of resources for alcohol and other drug addictions that people can get some resources and help from.
Is it NAMI? Okay, thank you.
And I would just put this out there: if there's anyone listening, watching this, and they think they may have a problem, if they reach out to you, you can give them my number, and I am happy to take them to their first meeting.
Thank you so much for that, sister. Thank you.
And I am actually attempting to start some meetings in some nearby high schools.
Awesome. Thank you, sister. And if there's anything that we can do to support you in that effort, please don't hesitate to let us know, because we're in it. We're in it for the long haul, and we see, every time we go out, we see it. Yeah. We see what it's doing to our communities, what it's doing to our families, and it's our responsibility to support and to assist in any way that we can. And we thank God for you. We really do. And for everything that you're doing and everything that you are in terms of being a wonderful living testimony.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. There was a time period that I wasn't, the shame and the guilt, I speak of it because I used to have that. And I now know that God allowed me to experience what I experienced and put me on this earth to try to share with others who need the help. So thank you.
That's it. Thank you so much, Sister Jacquelyn. We really appreciate you taking time to share with us your experience and your information that we believe will be impactful to people tune in to our show. And so we will definitely, if we get people who reach out to us who are interested in speaking with you and getting some help, we will absolutely make sure that to put them in contact with you. So we really appreciate your time.
And also I just want to, because this is another conversation that we had offline, and that is, if people are interested in setting up their own programs at their churches, at their synagogues, at their mosque, at their masjids, please also reach out to Sister for that as well, because we can never have too many places to receive our young people and give them the support, as well as for the families in their totality. Thank you again, Sister Jacquelyn Johnson, for being on Sober Sophistication podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Peace.
Oh my goodness, y'all. That was amazing. That was an amazing conversation. We thank Sister for spending time with us and sharing just such a wealth of information. Before we get out of here, we want to, of course, make you aware to please, if you like what you heard tonight and you want to hear more, please follow Magnolia Crescent Orchards on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and LinkedIn. That's where we promote this show, Sober Sophistication. And then, of course, this show was broadcasted through Facebook and YouTube tonight. We're still working on Instagram, y'all, so bear with us. But our snippets will be made available on YouTube, so you can check it out there. And we will upload this show in YouTube. It's live on YouTube, pardon me. So you'll be able to watch this show at the conclusion from the beginning and really just take notes and just kind of receive all the information that our dear sister had to share with us tonight. I want to thank everybody who joined us. And once again, if you would like to send some support, you want to say, hey, I really love what y'all are doing. I really appreciate it. If you're on Facebook, please feel free to send some stars our way. This helps us to become the best podcast that we can possibly become, all for the benefit of you as well as our community at large. So without further ado, we are going to rock on out, y'all.
Sober Sophistication.
with Sober Sophistication podcast. I'm Karima. That was my husband. And we are Magnolia Poetry and non-alcoholic winery. We see y'all from today. Check us out on Instagram for our next date, and our next guest is actually going to be Brother Hazan and Sister Rachel, and they're going to talk about how love overcomes alcohol. Ooh, don't want to miss that one. Don't want to miss it. See you then. Peace.
Sober sophistication, winning in a new way. It's alcohol free. With sober meets classy. Live your best life and sip with us. Sophistication is a must.